Captain Elena Vasquez crouched behind the wreckage of her escape pod, scanning the alien jungle with experienced eyes. The thick purple canopy overhead filtered the twin suns into strange shadows that danced across the forest floor. Her ship had been torn apart 3 systems ago by pirates, and this uncharted planet was supposed to be her safe haven until rescue arrived. She pressed her palm against the emergency beacon clipped to her belt, confirming it still pulsed its distress signal into the void. Help would come eventually. The Earth Defense Fleet didn't abandon their scouts. She just needed to survive until then. The jungle was alive with sounds she didn't recognize. Clicking, chittering, and occasional roars that made her hand drift toward the plasma pistol at her hip. According to her scanner, this world was classified as Category 7 on the Danger Index. That meant apex predators, hostile flora, and environmental hazards that could kill a human in dozens of creative ways. Elena sighed and reached for her jacket. The thick brown leather flight jacket had been with her through 15 years of deep space exploration. It was worn soft in places, patches covered old tears, and the Earth insignia on the shoulder had faded to a dull gold. But it was warm, familiar, and right now she needed that comfort. She shrugged it off and laid it across a flat rock near her makeshift camp, planning to air it out while she inventoried her supplies. The crash had left her with protein bars, a water recycler, basic medical supplies, and her sidearm with 2 spare power cells. Not ideal, but she'd survived worse. A rustling in the undergrowth froze her in place. Elena's hand moved to her weapon as something small pushed through the purple ferns. She expected something with too many teeth or venomous spines. What emerged instead made her breath catch. It was small, no bigger than a house cat, covered in midnight blue fur that shimmered when it moved. 6 legs carried its low-slung body, and a tail nearly twice its body length swished behind it. But what struck Elena most were its eyes. Large, golden, and currently fixed on her jacket with intense curiosity. The creature approached slowly, sniffing the air. Elena remained perfectly still. She'd seen enough alien wildlife to know that sudden movements were usually a bad idea. The small predator circled her jacket once, twice, then gently pawed at one of the sleeves. Then it did something Elena never expected. It crawled inside. The sleeve bulged and shifted as the creature wriggled deeper until only its tail hung out like a furry blue ribbon. A sound emerged from within the jacket, something between a purr and a trill. The tail tip twitched contentedly. Elena blinked. She'd encountered crystalline hive minds that sang in frequencies that made humans weep. She'd negotiated with methane breathers whose concept of honor involved ritual combat. She'd even once shared a meal with a sentient fungus colony. But this was new. More rustling in the undergrowth drew her attention. 3 more of the creatures emerged, slightly smaller than the first. They moved in a coordinated pack, heads swiveling as they scanned for threats. When they spotted Elena's jacket, with their companion's tail still visible, they chirped excitedly. One by one they approached. The second creature sniffed at the occupied sleeve, then discovered the other arm. It squeezed inside with surprising flexibility, contorting its 6-legged body until it disappeared into the leather. The third found its way into the main body of the jacket, and Elena watched in amazement as the leather rose and fell with the creature's breathing. The 4th cub, the smallest, seemed unsure. It circled the jacket, which now looked like a lumpy, moving sculpture. It mewed softly, a sound that tugged at something in Elena's chest, despite every survival instinct telling her these were predators on a deadly world. The small cub finally found an opening near the collar and wiggled inside. The jacket was now completely filled with alien creatures, all apparently finding it the most comfortable place in the entire jungle. Elena sat back on her heels, a bewildered smile crossing her face. She activated her wrist scanner and ran a quiet analysis. The readings came back quickly. Carbon-based life forms, mammalian equivalent, body temperature slightly higher than human standard. Claws were retractable, teeth were designed for tearing meat, but the jaw strength was relatively weak. Juveniles, probably 4 to 6 months old in developmental terms. Her smile faded. If these were cubs, where was their mother? The answer came in the form of a roar that shook leaves from the canopy overhead. Elena's plasma pistol was in her hand instantly as she spun toward the sound. Through the purple ferns came something that made the cubs look like toys. It stood nearly 2 meters at the shoulder, covered in the same midnight blue fur, but crisscrossed with scars that spoke of a life spent fighting. 8 legs instead of 6, and those golden eyes were not curious. They were calculating, measuring Elena as both threat and potential prey. The cubs squeaked from within the jacket. The mother's ears swiveled toward the sound, and her gaze shifted from Elena to the moving pile of leather on the rock. For a long moment, nothing moved. Elena kept her weapon pointed at the ground, non-threatening but ready. She'd learned long ago that showing fear to predators was often worse than showing aggression. But showing respect, showing that you understood the rules of engagement, that could sometimes make the difference. The mother predator took 1 step forward, then another. Her movements were cautious, controlled, nothing like the hunting rush Elena had feared. She approached the jacket and lowered her massive head, sniffing at the leather and the cubs hidden within. One of the cubs poked its head out and trilled at its mother. The sound was pure happiness, contentment, safety. The mother's tail, thick as Elena's arm, twitched once. Then she did something that would have been impossible to believe if Elena hadn't seen it with her own eyes. The massive predator lay down next to the rock, curled her body around the jacket filled with her cubs, and closed her eyes. Elena slowly holstered her weapon. She'd read every manual the Defense Fleet had on first contact protocols, survival on hostile worlds, and dealing with alien wildlife. None of them had a chapter on what to do when predators decided your clothing was the galaxy's best nursery. The twin suns moved across the sky as Elena carefully went about setting up a more permanent camp. She kept her distance from the predator family, but she couldn't help glancing over every few minutes. The mother never fully slept, one eye always cracking open to track Elena's movements. But she didn't seem aggressive as long as Elena stayed on her side of the small clearing. As evening approached, the cubs began to emerge from the jacket. They tumbled out in a tangle of legs and tails, immediately beginning to wrestle with each other. Their play was surprisingly gentle, lots of pouncing and rolling, but no serious biting or clawing. The mother watched them with what Elena could only interpret as patience, occasionally using her tail to redirect a cub that wandered too far. One of the cubs, the smallest one that had been last to enter the jacket, broke away from the pack. It moved toward Elena's side of the clearing with hesitant steps. The mother's head rose slightly, watchful but not intervening. Elena froze as the cub approached her. It sniffed at her boots, her pants, then looked up at her with those impossibly large golden eyes. Then it did something that made Elena's heart melt despite a decade and a half of professional distance. It mewed softly and rubbed its head against her shin. Slowly, carefully, Elena reached down and ran her fingers through the cub's fur. It was softer than anything she'd ever touched, and the creature's purring intensified. The other cubs noticed and came running. Suddenly, all 4 of them were climbing over her legs and demanding attention. The mother predator rumbled, a sound that wasn't quite threatening but definitely a warning. The cubs reluctantly retreated, but they kept looking back at Elena with clear disappointment. As night fell, the temperature dropped fast. Elena activated her thermal blanket and ate a protein bar, watching the predator family across the clearing. The mother had gathered all 4 cubs close, her body wrapped around them as the jungle's nocturnal sounds began their symphony. Elena noticed the cubs weren't settling. They squirmed and mewed, clearly uncomfortable in the dropping temperature despite their mother's warmth. The smallest one kept looking toward Elena's side of the clearing, specifically toward where her jacket lay over her pack. She looked at the jacket, then at the struggling family, then sighed the sigh of someone who knew they were about to do something incredibly stupid. Elena stood slowly and picked up her jacket. The mother's eyes locked onto her immediately, body tensing. Elena kept her movements smooth and unthreatening as she walked to the middle of the clearing, laid the jacket down, and retreated to her camp. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the smallest cub broke free from its mother and scampered to the jacket, diving into a sleeve with obvious relief. The others followed within seconds, and soon all four were tucked into the leather, their purring audible across the clearing. The mother looked at Elena for a long moment. Then she moved to the jacket, curled around it, and rumbled something that might have been approval. Elena smiled and settled into her own bedroll. She'd given away her only piece of Earth, the one thing that had traveled with her through countless light years and close calls. But somehow, watching those cubs sleep peacefully in her sleeves, she didn't mind. Over the next week, a strange routine developed. Elena would wake to find the cubs investigating her camp, always under their mother's watchful eye. They were endlessly curious, examining her equipment with gentle paws and confused tilts of their heads. The mother gradually allowed them closer, though she always maintained her protective presence. Elena learned to read their body language. Ears forward meant curiosity, ears back meant uncertainty. Tail held high meant confidence. Tail tucked meant fear. The cubs began to recognize her too, greeting her each morning with excited chirps and attempting to climb up her legs. The mother was harder to read, but Elena noticed patterns. The predator would disappear for hours during the day, returning with prey for her cubs. She always approached Elena's camp carefully, announcing her presence with a low rumble. If Elena acknowledged her with a nod, she'd pass through to the other side of the clearing. If Elena was too close to where the cubs slept, the mother would wait until she moved away. It was a language built on respect and boundaries, and Elena found herself appreciating the predator's intelligence more each day. On the 8th day, Elena's beacon started flashing rapidly. The rescue ship was close, probably within hours of landing. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt an unexpected sadness as she looked across the clearing at the mother and cubs. The cubs were napping in her jacket, as they did every afternoon when the heat became oppressive. The mother was grooming herself nearby, occasionally glancing over to ensure her babies were safe. Elena made a decision. She pulled out her emergency rations and walked slowly toward the mother predator. The creature's eyes narrowed, but she didn't rise, didn't show aggression. Elena placed the wrapped packages on the ground halfway between them, then retreated. The mother sniffed the air, then approached cautiously. She nosed the packages open and examined the protein bars inside. After a moment's consideration, she picked one up and carried it back to her cubs, dropping it near the jacket. Elena smiled. It wasn't much, but maybe those rations would help feed the cubs for a few extra days after she was gone. The rescue ship arrived just before sunset, a sleek frigate that descended on columns of fire. Elena gathered her few possessions, clipping the beacon back to her belt and checking her plasma pistol. She left the medical supplies and remaining rations near the center of the clearing, a final gift. The cubs had woken at the sound of the ship's engines, their ears pinned back in fear. The mother was positioned protectively in front of them, her body low and ready to fight this metal monster if it threatened her young. Elena walked toward the jacket one last time. She knelt beside it, running her hand over the worn leather. The smallest cub poked its head out of a sleeve and mewed at her. Elena gently stroked its head, feeling the vibration of its purr against her palm. The mother rumbled, not threatening but somehow questioning. Elena looked up at her, and for a moment, across the vast gulf of species and understanding, she felt a connection. two beings who'd found themselves in an unexpected situation and chosen trust over fear. Elena stood and began walking toward the ship. Halfway there, she stopped and looked back. The mother was watching her, 4 cubs clustered at her feet. The smallest one still held one of Elena's jacket sleeves in its mouth, refusing to let go. Something in Elena's chest cracked. She'd given up the jacket days ago, but seeing it claimed so completely by this alien family made it real. When she left this planet, her old companion would stay behind, sheltering cubs from the cold on a world whose name nobody even knew. The rescue team was calling her name over the external speakers. Elena waved to show she was coming, then turned back one last time. The mother predator dipped her head once, a gesture that looked almost like a nod. Elena returned it, human and alien, acknowledging each other in the oldest language there was. Then she turned and walked toward the ship that would carry her home, leaving behind a piece of herself wrapped around 4 sleeping cubs who'd chosen her jacket as their sanctuary. As the ship lifted off and the jungle became a purple blur below, Elena watched through the viewport until the clearing disappeared from sight. She'd write this in her report, though she suspected nobody would quite believe it. A Category 7 predator and her cubs, choosing to trust a human because of a worn leather jacket and the warmth it offered. Somewhere down there, she knew, 4 cubs would wake up confused about where the strange 2-legged creature had gone. Their mother would protect them, teach them to hunt, guide them to adulthood. And on cold nights, they might curl up in the sleeves of a jacket that had traveled farther than any of them would ever know, carrying the scent of a world they'd never see and a human who'd chosen kindness over fear. Elena pressed her hand against the viewport glass, a silent farewell to the family she'd never planned to have and would never see again. The jacket would keep them warm. That was enough.